Hello, my name is Bill Sawicki, Managing Editor of Healthcare IT News, a HIMSS media publication. Welcome, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Funding Your AI Journey, 4 Lessons from Seattle to Singapore, sponsored by KenSci and Microsoft. Having successfully cracked the formula together, KenSci and Microsoft are sharing 4 true cases of health systems that have invested in AI and witnessed success with as much as 4 times ROI in as little as 12 weeks. Hear from 2 leading experts in the industry on how they have helped health systems commence their AI journey, make better use of their existing data, and steer their organization toward true north and a visible win. Our speakers today are Sunny Niogi, Chief Growth Officer at KenSci, and Clifford Goldsmith, Director of Business Development and Strategy at Microsoft. With that, I'll hand it over to Sunny to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Bill, and good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sunny. I'm based out of Seattle, and I see over 40 people on the bridge, so thank you so much. Today, over the next 45 minutes, Clifford and I are going to walk you through 4 fundamental questions that keeps coming up in the AI in healthcare journey, right? We are going to start with, why are there so few AI impact stories in healthcare, right? The context is that everybody and their grandmom, including my grandmom, has started an AI in healthcare company, right? And despite that, there are so very few success stories where doctors and patients are standing up and saying this has made a real difference to us, right? So that is fundamentally the question of value, right? Then the second thing we're going to ponder on a little bit is what does it really take to get to that value, right? The transformation of healthcare is happening today. Is it happening fast enough, or rather, how long does it really take if you take an honest lens to it, right? And the third thing we're going to share about, and this is the part I'm super excited about, is how are some systems and countries doing it, right? Can we learn lessons of innovation applied with AI for patient care or better cost outcomes? Not just for US, but across the world, right? First world countries like US, UK, Singapore have a very different journey than developing nations, right? We are going to stay slightly towards the first world countries today, but it's a fascinating topic to think through and understand what's happening with the macroeconomics and the very nitty-gritty details of applying AI to healthcare, no matter which part of the world you are in. And then finally, we're going to give you a template to figure out how to fund this journey, right? I think that's the crux of the conversation today, saying, how do we find budget for AI in healthcare? That everybody wants to do it. There are a lot of people trying to do it, but a lot of them are failing. And how do you really figure out a governance model for finding budget, for measuring value, and for AI to kind of pay for itself beyond the startup phase, right? So that's what we have in front of us today. And I'm going to cut straight to the chase by asking you a very specific question. And the question is, I'll read it out for everybody, and I would love it for your inputs, is do you think an investment in AI is a necessary driver for healthcare providers to deliver better care and reduce cost? And I'll give everybody just a few seconds to submit. And if you don't submit, I kind of know your answer, but I'll give those who want to make their voice heard just 3-4 seconds of time here. Thank you so much. I see some responses come in. No surprises there. And I'm going to move in the next 2 and 1 second. So here are the poll results, right? And this shouldn't be surprising to anybody, right? We are all on this call on a Friday afternoon on a sunny day here in Seattle. At least most of us believe so, right? And I am no one to counter that question, but I'm going to challenge that question a little bit. I love those who said maybe, and I think every new innovation requires people who are not jumping in or jumping out, but kind of studying what might happen, right? And that's where I want to spend a little bit of time next, saying, well, what might happen? It obviously prima facie looks yes. And there are, of course, some people who might not think it's a yes, and that's also a very valid point of view. But what about most of the companies and health systems that are saying maybe? Let's see how it plays out, right? And so that's what we're going to spend a little bit of time on talking about in the next 2 minutes, right? And this is one of my favorite metaphors, right? Talking about healthcare AI is like DiCaprio in Wolf of Wall Street, or Titanic for that matter, right? Everything is soft, everything is nice and clean, and everybody's having a good time. But actually getting down to saving lives with healthcare or saving money with healthcare and seeing the impact and measuring that value is a hard process, right? And it's the same DiCaprio in a different movie. I know which movie. I know you know which movie I'm referring to. But fundamentally, it's that difference, right? It's very glamorous to talk about it. There are, in the last count, about 480 conferences happening on healthcare. If you were at HIMSS a couple of months back, you would have seen the madness there, and it's all fascinating. It's all lovely, right? There's so many smart people coming into the healthcare AI space who are traditionally not from healthcare, right? And that's great. But when people who are actually doing it are fighting the battles of saying, this technology is very promising, but, right? And here is what the but is, right? And that's the next slide I'm transitioning to. And let's give it a couple of seconds to load. And this is I'm presenting a study that was done by another partner called Sirius Tech and Chime. And it's a very fascinating study. I encourage all of you to go look it up on Sirius Tech's website. They fundamentally asked health systems with Chime saying, where are you in the AI journey, right? 7 out of 10, very similar to our poll results, saying we are doing it, right? 6 out of 10 said, I want to do it, but I don't have clarity, right? And the bigger the health system, the more enthusiastic they are. And I'm on the left-hand side of the graph, right? But, 6 out of 10 of those leaders are saying, I want to do it, but I don't know where to start. And, the questions that come up are saying, what is the right use case for it, right? It's very promising. There's so many things I can do. The innovation happens faster than healthcare can consume it, right? Microsoft, Google, Apple, companies like KenSci are innovating at a massively fast pace, building on top of each other and partnering with each other. But health systems go about in embracing innovation in a very studied fashion, and which is the right way to do it, right? It's a very evidence-driven science. You want to see the evidence before you commit to large, changes, right? But, even then, finding a starting point seems to be the biggest challenge with most people. And we see that with, all our customers and partners as well, right? People are happy to sit through 5 hours of conversation, but when you ask them the question saying, where is this place that you want to start the journey with, everybody goes quiet or everybody starts talking on top of each other saying, we don't know, right? And then the question comes around saying, do we have the team to do it? Are we ready from a technology perspective to do it? And even if we are there, the quality of data that we have is so terrible that even if we apply AI and machine learning and teach the machines, it's just going to learn the wrong kind of stuff, right? And, the leadership buy-in aspect, the last element there, we are actually seeing that go off a little bit. I think there was this, a phase in time about a couple of years back where there were a lot of leaders in healthcare saying this is a whole bunch of BS at this point in time. But, thankfully in the last 2 years or so, there have been some great breakthroughs. There have been very incremental improvements, and there are few evidences that point, that show some light, right? I think that's going to go down over time, but the fundamental question is, where do you start, right? And I'm going to hand it over to Clifford next to give you a perspective from a macro level as to where people are starting and what is driving that process, and then I will take you through, 4 customer examples of how they went about it. Over to you, Clifford.
Annie, thank you. It's great to be here with everybody. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, maybe in some cases. It's great to be here as well with you and with a partner of ours, KenSci, and I love seeing one of our partners reference another partner. So the survey that Sunny showed you from Sirius Tech is another Microsoft partner. It's really important that we have that kind of an ecosystem to deliver on these results. I have to say, I interpret the maybes, or the people who said maybe at the beginning, as something quite important, because I think it's time for us to apply real rigor in healthcare to AI. And that to me is a maybe, because if you don't, we actually are not guaranteed of any, real clear outcomes and measurable outcomes. So, but let me start with let me just start with the next slide, which is what the worldview looks like from a healthcare perspective. What is the imperative driving healthcare? And this is not just the US, it's worldwide. You've all heard of it. It's not something new. It's the quadruple aim. But I just want to reinforce it because we need to reinforce it constantly. It means better health. That means health of populations, real health, wellness. It means better care, which is the delivery of care across the board with a 360-degree care continuum across the continuum of care. The third area is lowering cost of care. And that's an important issue, and it was certainly implicit in the question. But the last is the newer area that we really think about a lot, and that is what has happened since we've implemented more electronic health records? Are we lowering productivity? And some people have suggested we do. And so it's important that we pay attention to increasing that productivity again after doing that. So that's the world perspective, the health perspective. Here's the technology perspective, or at least the Microsoft technology perspective today. And if there's one way to describe Microsoft today, it's this slide. It really is that we think about both the intelligent cloud and the intelligent edge. And that means that whatever you do in the cloud or on the edge has to be seamlessly integrated in a ubiquitous computing platform. Most importantly is there are some solutions and some scenarios where healthcare needs intelligence actually at the edge because you don't have the time for a fast turnaround, for a turnaround to the cloud. Or maybe you don't have connectivity in certain situations. So having an intelligent edge and an intelligent cloud strategy is core to our AI strategy and a multi-device strategy. In fact, just one last point on the slide, the intelligent cloud that we think about is really three integrated clouds. It's the Azure cloud, which is where many people do storage, computing, machine learning, IoT importing of data, and cognitive computing and other things. It's also the Office 365, which is our collaborative suite. It is another cloud service, fully integrated with the same cloud. And the third is our Dynamics, which is really delivering CRM, patient relationship management, member relationship management, or customer relationship management in the cloud as well. So what does this really mean to healthcare? And this is to me, the most important slide in terms of where we're going. We've done a lot of work, particularly in the US, but worldwide, about getting systems of record in place. So we digitize data, but digitization of data is not itself digital transformation. It really requires more than that. And that's not to say it's a bad thing that we've digitized data and we've now got systems of record that people can use. It's an important piece of care, but we now need to add to that the systems of intelligence. And that's what we're talking about here today. How do we use that data as well as other data that you'll see Sunny will talk about that's available, public data and other private data that's available in order to drive real systems of intelligence insight into what we're doing in both clinical practice, in the operation of our system, our health systems, and in our payer spaces, whether they're government or private payers, and in our life science space. And then, importantly, is that move from there to systems of engagement and collaboration, which are beyond the scope of today's discussion, but might have been the reason for the person who suggested that AI itself is not, just having AI investments is not necessarily a driver for change in care or lowering costs, because we do have to have system engagement and collaboration to make that work effectively. Microsoft takes this view, so the imperative view is the quadruple aim. Microsoft actually looks at this in terms of how we think about reimagining care. Our all-up thinking is we want to be part of an ecosystem that really reimagines the way we deliver care and the way we deliver health across our communities. And we do that from three perspectives. One is we look at how we improve operational outcomes, which is very important both to quality, safety, as well as lowering cost. We look at how we empower care teams to be more effective, particularly with collaboration and communication. And we look at ways that we enable more personalized care, which is a broader category of which things like precision medicine are a subset, which is really changing the diagnostics of care. We do believe very strongly that the old paradigm is still present, but is on its way out. That this paradigm of episodic care, so that when you get sick, you feel symptoms, you see a doctor, you go to a hospital, you get given treatment, or you get given information, and you get better, and you don't think about your health again until the next symptom is next time you're sick, is an old paradigm and is really the essence of our high cost in the United States of episodic care. Where we think we need to go is to more of a care across the continuum, something that looks like this, which is more continuous, with the patient at the center. The patient-oriented paradigm, it's connected, it's always connected because of the connectivity we have today. It's thinking about things not just when we get sick, but from a wellness perspective and prevention as well. And it's continuous care with connected consumers, connected caregivers, connected devices, remote monitoring of patients, and ultimately highly personalized treatments of care. So with that, I'll hand back to Sunny for him to walk you through some of the scenarios there, some of the examples that we have.
Thank you, Clifford. And that's such a fascinating perspective. We work very closely with Microsoft. Pretty much any health system across the world works with Microsoft in getting themselves or getting better, right, in a spirit of partnership. And through that partnership, we are learning what Clifford just sort of summarized. And I'm going to walk you through, what's happening sort of across the world, right, which is surprisingly similar, but in a very different context, right? And I have 3 examples for you that I'm going to first walk through, right? But the core of what I want you to take back is that the future of healthcare is going to get outside the hospital, right? The episodic construct of care that Clifford talked about is in the past, right? And as Clifford said, is changing to a connected care, paradigm, right? And not just when you see a doctor, but what happens? Can we use AI? Can we use machine learning to do predictive and preventive medicine, right? From early detection, early intervention, early prevention. And I'll briefly tell you what is the examples I'm going to show you so that you have some context. But, I'm going to take a U.S. example of taking care of a CHF patient and a CHF population, and not just in a general sense of readmission avoidance, but also really thinking about utilization, saying, when should this person come in? Can I essentially get ahead of the curve and look at their biomarkers and see if a patient who's not suffering from CHF today going to suffer from CHF tomorrow, right? The example I'm going to show you from NHS is going to talk about COPD patients, right? It's a very intensely high utilization problem. People are sick for too long. They come and go from the hospital, and generally it's, folks who are slightly advanced age, so they need a different kind of care. And in that context, we're going to talk about connected devices, how NHS is innovating with us and Microsoft to kind of manage and monitor people even when they leave a hospital and they're at home, and drive telehealth towards them so that they do not come back into the hospital and spend 3 days when all you need is send a nurse home to fix their devices. And finally, one of the most exciting examples I want to share with you is what the country of Singapore is doing with diabetes, right, with us at Microsoft. And fundamentally they have come to the conclusion that they just cannot manage the entirety of diabetic population that is going to come up in Singapore over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? It's an island. There aren't enough beds, right? So how do you manage diabetes for an entire country, right? How do you drive early prevention, early intervention? How do you give them the right kind of nudges and change behavior over time at a country level, right? So I have examples of from fee-for-service, the federal government, to a very different innovative construct where people are thinking both in terms of money but also in long-term value, right? So that's what I'm going to walk you through. Let's start on the big story with the simple construct of a patient, right? All of us on this call are going to end up like this, whether we suffer from CHF, COPD, diabetes, whatever, right? This is our life, 20, 30 years moved forward. And this is a patient, a patient who went through a CHF episode up in Seattle. Unfortunately, he died. And this is what his last 5 years of his life was, right? In 2013, he had an incident, walked in, was in the hospital for 3 days, sent back home. Things went worse, came back, had to be kept in the hospital for 21 days, came back again, 7 days, and so forth, right? This is a classic case of, how do you avoid readmission? And I'm pretty certain of those of you on the call today or, hearing this as a recording, you would have grappled with this problem, right? And then after this person was, stabilized by the best care available up in the West Coast, right? He was sent home, came back, had another incident 2 years down, but 3 years later, he came back, stayed, and we lost him, right? That's a very typical journey of a 76-year-old CHF patient, right? This is not strange. This is the norm, right? And if you think about how to make this better, right? The traditional thinking has been, look, the highest spike is in 2013, right? So let's go figure out readmission, and then that's great, right? But you look at that and you also say, look, what's happening at the end of life here, right? This patient is in, and we have about 8-9 days of this patient staying in the hospital. We are doing some intense work on this patient, but ultimately we lose him, right? can we instead figure out how to use machine learning, AI, and whatever other tools that are available to us to see if we can do end-of-life prediction better? Because if we can do that, right, we can have a conversation with the patient about palliative care, right? And it's a better model both for the patient because you have a far better end-of-life outcome, and a far better model for the health system because the same bed can be used for a patient who needs it even worse, right? So, and I know it's a very hard decision to make, but it's a very logical decision to make, right? Today, for example, the palliative care stay in US is less than 7 days on an average, right? Which is terrible. You are telling somebody 7 days before they die that they can't be helped, right? Instead, can you move the decision framework 6-9 months ahead of schedule, right? And and this is possible today, right? We have done this. We have published a paper. If you go hit up our website, KenSci.com, you will see a published paper that has been looked at by doctors. And the math exists, right? It's an opportunity to apply the math, right? The other bigger question here is saying all this could have been avoided if we could talk to this patient 10 years before and say, look, given how it is going, given how ejection fractions are for you, you are going to end up like this. Instead, I'm going to do this, this, and this for you, right? For a 76-year-old patient, it might not mean the world, but for a 36-year-old patient, it might mean the world, right? And today we can do that. We can look at lab values, we can look at biomarkers, we can see how they're progressing, and put a call to that patient saying, look, this movie has played before, right? We all watch Netflix. Netflix can tell us, saying if you saw this, you are going to see this next, right? Because thousands of other people have done that, right? We can look at ejection fraction values of CHF patients or a population and say this is what's going to happen to you unless you change course, right? So, so that's just an art of possible with a single patient and how AI can impact that patient, right? And beyond the cost of life, right, there is also the cost of business here. And that's where things get complicated. And if I show you the next slide, that some of you might have a chuckle, right? Human beings rarely fall sick in linear terms, right? It's almost like a subway map, right? You have CHF, you have diabetes, you have this thing flaring up, you have the other thing flaring up, and, eventually all of us converge on death, right? So it's a hard problem to solve. Life is complicated, death is complicated, right? So at times it's hard to kind of think of this as an individual patient problem and really think of this as a population problem, saying, look, it's very hard to model this at n equal to 1 level. It can be done, right? But human beings just don't solve or fall sick at n equal to 1 level for n equal to 1 disease, right? They have these multiple problems. So one good way of thinking about the lowest common denominator of getting value out of AI and ML is utilization, right? And I'll show you this graph, and bear with me. This is a slightly math nerdy graph, but I'll break this down in case it's too much here, right? What we are essentially showing is a population of about 60,000 people, of which about 375 are high utilizers today, and the rest are cascaded like a pyramid. This, you look at your patient set, and you would see resonance in these numbers, right? This is how a population generally utilizes healthcare, right? Few patients, come in are frequent high utilizers, and few patients never come up, right? Or few people in the population never come up. The question to answer, and the question we are answering with this health system, which is one of the largest IDN in the West Coast, is fundamentally saying, can I look at this data and predict who are going to be my high utilizers for next year, right? And if you look at the graph, you would see that even all the high utilizers from 2017 do not end up being all the high utilizers for 2018, right? Some of them get better, we lose some of them, and some of them just, step down in terms of, immediacy of problems, right? And then from the low utilizers, some people creep up, right? Say, for example, unmanaged diabetic becomes an unmanaged diabetic with a CKD stage 3 or a stage 4 next year, right? And that patient just requires different kind and intensity of care, right? And, today AI and machine learning is helping health systems figure this math out, saying, looking at, your claims data, or even looking at your, lab report and looking at longitudinal history as well as other patients' longitudinal history. Can I tell that Sunny is going to end up in the hospital 6 times, though he has only ended up in the hospital 1 time this year, right? And the math holds up to scrutiny. The AUCs and the precision matrix are all there. And I'm not going to talk about the math today. I want to kind of give you the sense that it's possible to look at a population and then go specific to a patient. And this is one of the best places to see the value of predictive analytics and machine learning, right? Saying, it's not a SQL query. I can't write this out as a, find me patients who do this. It's really about letting the math figure this out on itself and giving this data to the doctors and the care managers and the service design leads to say, look, these 374 patients that were high utilizers yesterday, only 152 or 162 of them are going to be high utilizers tomorrow, right? The other 420 are people we don't know, don't engage with today, right? So that's sort of a good starting point to think about how to find value in the process, right? And and these are just numbers from this, but you can look at the number and say, look, that's not a big number, right? It's about $3 million. But let me tell you this: with $3 million of hard savings, you can invest a lot in AI to drive $30 more million. The point I will make repeatedly over time is that be aware of too big to fail AI projects, right? A $3 million payback on a $300K investment is great, right? You take the $3 million payback and invest another $300K for the next problem, and you kind of think of that as a domino, right? High utilizer is a great place to start, right? And this is a patient population of 63,000 patients managed over a year for $3 million in savings, right? You extend that out over 10 years, that number adds up, right? You extend that, scale that up to some of your population base, and you can see kind of how that number scales up, right? So my next example is going to be one of that scale up in terms of a country, right? And the example I'm going to show you is with NHS Scotland. Pardon, this is a very busy slide. Fundamentally, what Microsoft and KenSci is doing with NHS Scotland is looking at their entire COPD population, about 1.2 million patients, right? North of England, south of Scotland, poor air quality, a lot of coal mines, kind of like Appalachia in US, right? And it's a exploding population of COPD patients, right? And the federal health system or the trusts in this context are just not ready to manage such a high spike in people staying in the hospital for this long, right? So we are partnering with them to figure out 3-4 things, and I will kind of skip this slide because it's too dense. You read this at your leisure, but I'll tell you what it fundamentally does, right? You see Grandpa Jim here, or Grandpa Ken. The story is about helping Grandpa Ken sleep better, right? And there is a intense example behind this. What happens is if you're a COPD patient, right, one of the complications you get is sleep apnea, right? You don't breathe well, you don't sleep well, you are forever, tossing and turning, and that causes, a host of other issues, right? Just not sleeping enough is terrible, right? It's terrible for software companies, it's terrible for retired grandpas, right? So, so what NHS is doing is basically sending, patients like Ken home with a ResMed device, which is like a breathing device that supplies oxygen, right? And the problem with the demographic that Ken is in is that he's single, he's not tech savvy, right? Half the time his ResMed device is not set right? So his breathing is weird, and things get worse, right? So what NHS is doing is literally solving it this way, and I'm just going to play out the animation a bit so that everything comes up. Right, sorry, pardon me. I lost control of my slides. All right, we are going to take another go at it, right? So here is what they're doing. They're saying, look at my entire population of 1.2 million people and tell me who are going to be the future high utilizers in the COPD context, which is kind of what I showed you last, right? Then they're saying, tell me who are going to show up in ED, right? Not just utilizers, but ED utilizers. And then once they show up in ED, and if I have to admit them, tell me how long they're going to stay with me, so that I can figure out which nursing facility to send them to, right? Because it's just not enough to figure out how long they are in. I got to figure out where they go and whether beds are available there, so that I can give a heads up to my tertiary care center saying, I got a patient coming in, free up some bed, otherwise he's going to get stuck in the bed here, right? So, and then finally at the point of discharge, they're figuring out discharge disposition, saying, should I send this person home to a nursing home, or should I send this person with a home nurse, or should I just do telehealth, right? And so should I step up or step down his care management? And then finally, they are doing remote monitoring, like with this ResMed device, where we are essentially bringing in the data about your oxygen intake and a few other data sets through Microsoft technology onto Azure, and then triangulating that with the patient's longitudinal health record to say, this patient is going south, right? And it is such an individual issue, right? It's the same thing for code blue prediction in acute care, right? No two code blues are similar. It depends on the vitals, it depends on the patient, it depends on what has happened to the patient, right? So we are basically triaging it in real time, and then they are intervening it the following way, right? They're saying, Ken, I see that you have not been sleeping for more than 5 hours. Let's jump on a telehealth conversation and I will show you how to put the device better. Or Ken, that is not working. I'm going to send a nurse home for you, right? Or Ken, come back. I'm going to send a car or an ambulance to your home. Come back, stay in the hospital for 2 days. We'll set you right, and then I'll send you home, right? And in those three options are basically a $10 option, a $100 option, and a $10,000 option, right? And it's just about knowing and having a clear sense of intervention, saying if this happens, then I do this, right? And it's a fascinating way of solving it at a complex country level scale with the same amount of resources, but driving far better care outcomes, right? And hopefully that Microsoft and us, we did a case study. If you go to Microsoft.com and search for NHS, you will see this case study. But I'm going to quickly move to the Singapore example, right? Again, a country scale problem with a chronic disease where they are thinking about AI in a very strategic way with both KenSci and Microsoft. And our part in the journey is a small part, right? And that's how it should be, right? Because care is such a big, complex problem. AI has a role to play in it, but it is not the thing, right? And if we can come to that with the humility, I think we will be successful, right? So just to give you a sense of where we fit in the whole puzzle, we are the circle towards the left-hand side, and that circle is hard to read, but I'll tell you what it does, right? What we are doing there is basically re-stratifying the population for pre-diabetic, right? And there are about 400,000 of them, so it's not a trivial number, right? And then for those pre-diabetic people, we are getting very, very, very specific as to what to do. And I'll give you anecdotes, right? I'll show an example, I'll give you anecdotes. I am a 37-year-old, right? I have an intense job. I travel 100 days a year, right? So my lifestyle is slightly different than most normal people's, right? And I can bet you good money that end of every quarter I have a hypertension issue, right? I have a family history of diabetes, right? So I am kind of an ideal, patient or an example for this exact thing, right? So I may or may not be pre-diabetic today, but I should be getting there in another 10, 15 years, right? At that point in time, for sure that my end of quarter hypertension is going to rise up because, I just happen to have a quota number on my head, right? I travel a lot, so in the middle of the week, I am eating all kind of random stuff, right? And what Singapore is doing is for patients like me, they are basically sending me a coupon on the 15th of March, or 15 days before the end of every quarter, saying, Sunny, you are pre-diabetic and you have a propensity for hypertension. Here is a coupon for a yoga class, right? Go to the yoga class, right? And they are getting that specific, right? Then they are pushing notifications to the citizens saying, hey, Sunny, you have been traveling and I see you are close to a shopping mall and whatnot. Here is a coupon for a salad, right? Have this salad today and scan me the receipt of the salad and I'll give you some points, right? So it's getting very specific, very intentional to drive care outcomes at n equal to 1 level, almost like a marketing business, right? Great marketing platforms like Amazon, Netflix does this so well, right? They know what offer to pop to you at what point in time. The country of Singapore is doing it for healthcare, right? And all power to them, right? Because if you can do that right, and this is all, in early stages of rollout, right? So we will hear more about this as we go down the path. But fundamentally what they're doing is they're building the technology and the backbone to drive such interventions and offers. And then they're gamifying that process, saying, if you go have the salad or if you go to the yoga class, you accrue a number of points, right? And if everybody has a Fitbit, everybody has been given a Fitbit rather, right? And they're tracking steps and all that, and they're basically saying if you cross a number of steps and get a number of points, here is a reward for you, right? And that cost is far lesser than the cost of a diabetic patient who has diabetes at 40, right? That patient is going to cost the country close to $2-3 million during his lifetime, right? If you can change that behavior for $10,000 over 10 years, power to that, right? So that's what's happening. Right. So I'll give you a quick sense of this, the kind of nudges where, people get nudges for Tai Chi classes, people get nudges for, kickboxing classes, and they track this. They basically track saying, for a general patient like this is the outcome, right? Instead, Alin has not come into the hospital for the last 1 month or 1 year, right? And that's the cost of saving, right? So that's just a fascinating way of thinking at a system level, making it possible at an n equal to 1 level, and then tracking hard math on these patients, right? And I think if we were to think of AI as a strategic investment for a system, we have to be able to do all three of them together, right? Saying, how do we put in place a system, how do we measure it, and how do we make it real for each patient, not as a macro problem, right? And with that context, I'm going to hand it back to Clifford for a quick sense of what the experts are saying and doing in this space. Back to you, Clifford.
Thanks, Sunny. That was great. That was really a great look at the different areas that we can impact. But let's look at overall. Let's look at what people are really sort of doing. But let's start with a poll, another polling question. And this core poll is actually, please go ahead and answer it. And while you're answering it, I'll talk a bit about it. We're actually going to look after the slide, after we see the results, at what areas people are focusing on, which will be indicative of what you think decision makers are saying. So I'll give you a minute or two to do that. Okay, so thanks. We seem to be getting more. People could just answer. So there we go. We're getting a few more answers. So let me show you what everybody's saying. So what's really interesting is that the VP of Analytics, very little is on the technology side there, we can see. So there's pure technology. The CIO probably includes a combination of clinical and operational. The CFO definitely is operational. And the VP of Analytics is probably also a combination, probably more clinical than operational in any institution. So let's now look at what we're finding. First of all, before we do that, slide hasn't refreshed for me yet. Maybe it's got to build out in it. Ah, there we go. Let me go back. Sorry, same as Sunny. Let me build the slide out. So what are we saying really in terms of what's driving AI in healthcare, and what are the big factors that are impacting AI? The first is that what's really happening is the cloud has provided a lot of data. There are public data sets and private data sets. There's our own data, like electronic health record data, clinical data. There's patient-generated data. A lot of data today. We talked about the Fitbit, Sunny, and that type of data. So we have a lot of data available, and with the cloud now, suddenly we're able to take that data and look for the kinds of insights you were describing, like, for example, looking at a pre-diabetic or a early intervention for earlier detection of a disease. The second thing that's happening from an AI perspective is that we are empowering people to make better healthcare decisions, both personally and from a work perspective, making better decisions about their patients, if you're a clinician or a caregiver of some sort. And ultimately, as I mentioned right at the beginning, we're developing a foundation for personalized medicine or precision medicine that will allow us to be far more precise, not just in our diagnosis, but also in the way we treat patients. And that was pretty clear particularly from the Singapore and NHS examples. So here's what we're seeing in the industry, which it partly relates to what we saw from our own survey that we just did. It's got some similarities to that, but we definitely are seeing that the biggest investment that people are making and expect the biggest growth rate in the marketplace for AI to be in the clinical applications. I think it's a fine line, because I think some of the clinical applications tie into the operational. So that 50% will be clinical, about 30% will be operational, and only about 20% will have a financial component to it. So on the clinical side, I think you could see the example that Sunny was giving about Singapore actually has both a clinical piece, because it's an earlier detection of a disease, so that you can actually intervene earlier and do something about it. But it also has an operational or a financial side to it, because it has implications for the way we treat patients, where we treat patients, and it has implications for the overall financing or cost of care at the country level. You can see there that there's a projected huge increase in spend in total growth of the market in the AI market, and it's projected to be about $36 billion by 2025. Here's what some of these applications are. So what are the clinical applications of AI or analytics? And actually, I think one of the things that we think a lot about is currently we do a lot of business intelligence. So I think of analytics as more business intelligence, AI as being the next step beyond business intelligence. So it's sort of a BI to AI move. On the clinical side, the kinds of things we're seeing are behavioral analytics, population health. Sunny gave some of those examples. Predicting care and predicting the guidance that we should be giving people for care. And then one of the areas that's interesting that there's a lot of growth in, but it's slightly different to the use of big data. It's the use of images themselves of various sorts, whether they're histology images or radiology images, in order to better predict the diagnosis or suggest potential diagnoses for that image. You can also think of it, AI in the genetic space being used in a similar way by using it to predict with a combination of phenotype and genotype data, being able to predict better what the potential diseases are for that patient. So we're seeing growth in those areas. And readmissions is something on the border because of the move towards value-based pay. It's on that divide between clinical and operational. In the pure operational space, or the operational and financial space, we're seeing a lot of work in things like throughput and trying to assess better your organizational throughput and requirements for the organization. That's closely related to staff management, because obviously if you're predicting a higher volume of patients, maybe because of public data like flu data, weather data, CDC data, and at the same time your own population, which you've watched for several years, you can then adjust your staffing requirements to optimize, particularly nursing, that would improve both the operational and satisfaction of your nurse clinicians. And then, in the pure financial side, we're seeing a lot of AI around both the front end or front office revenue cycle management and the back office revenue cycle management, looking at next best interventions for members or patients. So with that, I'm going to pass back again to Sunny to take another poll and to finish off the discussion.
Thank you, Clifford. So let's go to the poll, and I'm going to rush to the next few slides quickly. So, pretty simple, straight up question up here saying, what is your expected timeline for seeing ROI from your AI investment, right? And I believe we have a bit of a poll fatigue here, so I'll urge one final time to make a final push to get in your answers before I move on. And while you think about your response, thank you so much. Right, so it's and I see the point here, right? That it is going to be a long journey. Most of you are essentially pulling in, and I'll show the results here. Is expecting a 1 year to 2 year impact time horizon, which is the right way to think about it, right? While you can see some short-term updates, short-term upside, and we'll talk about the short-term upsides. The real value in AI is slightly more long-term, especially as Clifford described, right? That half of the AI innovation is happening in the care management side, and that's where things take a long time to change, right? But you can still get some short-term upside from front office problems or revenue cycle problems. And I'll give you an example of two very quickly to kind of contextualize what long-term and a short-term ROI cycle looks like, right? But I'm going to preface that with this very important comment to bring us to the last 5-6 minutes of this conversation, is that in the near future, right, every health system will need to embrace AI as a nervous system, right? Just the way today we use data and nobody debates that. AI will become the next evolution of data, right? As Clifford also talked about that a bit, right? But the bad and the sad news is that very few will be able to afford it, right? Because it's not going to be a cheap transition. And I'll tell you what that not cheap means, right? For today's analyst perspective, AI in healthcare is a $36 billion market 3-4 years from now, right? Now, for every dollar you spend in AI, the change management side is going to take about 3x more, right? The math and the technology has come to a point where it is relatively cheap, right? Getting people to change behaviors, very hard, right? So assume it's going to cost 5x more. You are looking at about $200 billion of money going down this path, right? And unless you can see 5x, 10x ROI, these things are not going to stay on for long. You will see that ROI, but it's not going to be distributed evenly, right? Some systems are going to see massive upside. Some systems are going to struggle, right? And I'll give you an example of how a massive upside can be had, right? And if you are in a federal system, or if you're in a Blues or a payer or of a care management team, right? The question you think about is not so much as to change your process, but to change how precise your process is, right? Can you use AI to increase the specificity of risk stratification, right? Can you look at your 60,000 high utilizers and say, here are the 20 that I'm going to work on, right? Can you once people fall sick, can you figure out how to triage how much resource you provide to what kind of patient, right? That was sort of the NHS example, right? Sorry, that was more of the Singapore example, right? And then finally, can we use AI to essentially, at a real time figure out what's the best way to serve a patient, right? So that's sort of a, long journey to, realize value, but you can really bring it back into productivity for care management team, right? The other ROI example that is more short term that I want to give you is, something that Clifford also talked about is in your front office, right? If you look at your ED today, 1 in 50 patients on an average, if you're doing really well, walk out. Basically, that's the patient coming in, waiting for too long, and walking out, right? So let's take that as a very, generally universal example of that this happens, right? In the best systems, you see 1 in 50. I have seen as bad as 8 in 50, and some days it is 20 in 50, right? It's EDs are generally very chaotic. A lot of patients slip out, and if you're in a fee-for-service construct, you lose a lot of money. If you're in a value-based construct, you essentially instead of seeing the patient now, for $200, you are going to see the patient later for $20,000, right? Either which way, it's a huge impact on both the patient and the financial outcome. So I'm going to give you an example here very quickly of 3 patients waiting in the ED with knee pain, right? Prima facie, all of them are similar. Who do you go look at, right? And that's where machine learning comes in, saying, I don't know, right? Let's look at their social determinants. Let's look at, where they work. Let's look at traffic around. Let's see where they stay. And let's see if they're willing to go out. If there's a mom who has come in with a knee pain and has a, child to pick up at 3:30 and it's 3 o'clock, she's going to leave, right? But if it's a, slightly older person who's here at 10 in the morning, it's okay. He will stay for 30 more minutes, right? So triangulating that, not on a case-by-case basis, but as an autonomous process, saying here are my patients, here are the social determinants, here is who's going to leave, even though their wait times may be the most, right? And go talk to that patient and just move them and do what you have to do so that patient doesn't leave the ED, right? Simple things like that doesn't require us to change the practice of medicine. It just requires us to change the practice of how we look at data, to reduce left without being seen math, right? And that's what we are doing with quite a few of our customers to get them started, saying, look, before you take on complex long-range problems, free up your ED, right? It's there is enough data, there is enough precedence, you have ADT feeds, you bring it all together, and let's just get better at who we go spend time with if we are overflowing. If not, we are fine, but if you're overflowing when there are seasonal variations, let's go figure it out, right? And in the spirit of figuring it out, this is what we work with our customers on. We say, look, as Clifford said, there are many ways to think about AI, right? And this is a busy graph, but I'll break this for you. There is patient flow, a fundamentally heads and beds problem. There is utilization and cost, which is, figuring out disease progression and the general cost of population. And then there is population health, where you are fundamentally thinking about how to take care of specific chronic disease patients across a population better, right? And depending on which path you go and depending on who is championing AI in the enterprise, right, you have different payback times, right? And even within that, not all use cases are equal, right? For example, fixing it at ED is far easier than taking care of diabetes patients better, right? The other example is, when we keep telling customers saying, start with freeing up your beds, right? You can optimize many things, but unless your beds are free, there is no point in optimizing the rest of them, because people will come to ED, get taken care quickly, then show up at inpatient, and then you don't have beds. Why not do the beds first, then go to ED, right? So, depending on which fight you want to pick up, your AI outcome might be very, very different, right? And, now that we have worked with about quite a few customers, both US and elsewhere, we have a general sense of saying, look, here are the first battles you pick. The other battles, even if there is a strong, impatience in the organizations to get it done today, park it for later, right? Don't take that on. Don't take on an 18-month AI problem as your first AI problem, right? Get smart, get agile, and then move quickly, right? So embrace the spirit of sprint, right? And here's what a sprint looks like, right? The fact that if you choose the right problem, it pays for the next problem, right? You invest X amount of money, you get 5x. From that 5x, you invest another X for the next problem, right? And we tell our customers, and we see this with a lot of customers who are thinking of AI governance more strategically, saying this should be a self-funding model, right? It's a complex journey. There are 30, 50 different things we can do with AI, but I'm not going to carve out half my budget to do AI. That's just not going to happen, right? None of large health systems or small health systems today have an AI budget earmarked beyond the innovation team, right? The BI team is doing some certain things. The clinical team and the CMIOS team is coming and saying we want to do this, but there is no ERP kind of a budget or a EMR kind of a budget earmarked for AI, right? So you got to learn the spirit of starting small, quickly showing results, and then going and building on top of that, right? If you saw the NHS, remember the NHS Scotland example, right? It was like that. There were 5 different use of AI in that process, and in the utilization paid for the next one, that paid for the remote monitoring one, and so forth, right? So you start small, start smart, quickly show value, then move to the next. Because no matter how you look at it, it's going to be a long journey, right? And I'm going to show you what a journey looks like, just as a by way of a reference, right? And this is our operating model, and there are many flavors to that soup, but I'll tell you our flavor, right? You essentially say, we walk in and say, look, let's first free up your beds, then free up your time, then free up your caregivers, right? And in that is how hospitals are also run, right? Beds are the one constraint you cannot change, right? Time for OR, time for staffing, right? Is certain things that you can change and really see a lot of value come out of. If you are scheduling smarter, if you are just managing your heads and beds smarter, you have a lot of very happy internal champions in the nursing team, in the doctors, who would say, I will go with you and I will walk that long walk with you, and I will see what happens, right? And then eventually you free up your caregivers by taking on more population health kind of problems like the diabetes and CHF, right? Because those are going to be long-term journeys, right? And as you go through this journey, be mindful of bringing on data in a mindful way, right? You don't need all the data all the time. You don't need all the data on day 0, right? Neither do you need all the technologies, infrastructure on day 0. You might start with a basic blob storage and eventually move to a data lake, right? But starting with a data lake might be too complicated for your current system, right? So, just root this in pragmatism, knowing that this is going to be a long journey. That has been our core lesson in understanding value and finding funding for AI internally, right? So I'll close with final comments on this. That, as Clifford very sagely said, it's a journey from BI to AI, and I would take that one step further, and I would say that it's a journey from BI to AI to ROI, right? Unless the end point is ROI, don't even do this, right? And ROI need not be hard dollars. It could be patients' lives saved, but there has to be a clear sense of return. And then it's a beginning point. If your BI is not good, somebody help you, right? It's not an AI problem. You need to get your BI better, right? And then come to AI, right? So, so that's sort of the journey. And in that journey, there are, 4, 5 design principles, right? It's going to take you a while. Most things will work. Some might not, right? In fact, in the early days, most won't make it. Most of your AI initiatives might not be very successful. The math might be successful. You might get great AUCs, but people might not use it, or doctors might not trust it, right? And therefore, don't commit to a too big to fail AI, right? Don't go all in with your chips on the table, saying next year all my money is going to be on AI. It's not the right way to do it. If anybody's asking you to do it that way, just ask around a little bit more, right? So in summary, I don't believe that funding is going to be a problem for AI if you are taking a agile sprint approach, right? What will be a problem is governance, right? Because you will have 50 different innovation you want to fund, and no single strategic leadership and single strategic program to think through what you do first, where you go first, what you buy, what you build, who you hire, who you don't, right? And some of the best health systems today are embracing that challenge and solving it. And that's a question for a follow-on webinar, but I'm going to leave 5 minutes for the audience for Q&A. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you on Clifford's behalf and my behalf. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you both for a wonderful presentation. Thank you both for a wonderful presentation. I want to first remind everyone that you can continue to submit questions using the Ask a Question panel on your screen. So, for our first question, this is for Sunny. What's the simplest and best way for a large health system to implement an AI system in their organization?
Wow, that's cutting straight to the chase. I'll give you my experience as where we have seen, right? And I kind of touched upon that. I think the simplest and perhaps the best starting point is inpatient flow and census, right? It's essentially thinking about your bed management process, your length of stay process, right? There is enough data in your historical records. You have ADT feeds, right? You use that, crunch the numbers to figure out which patient is going to stay for how long and when can I send them home. If you can fundamentally solve that, right, that changes how many patients you can look at, how long a patient stay in the hospital, and what happens to them after they leave. Because, in the process of length of stay and census, you're trying to figure out whether we should send them to a SNF or home, right? And you start, then your follow-on problem is readmission, right? So, basically that's a nerve center of a hospital, great place to start. ED, depending on your business model, sometimes is a great place to start again because there is richness of data. The change management process is not complete, it's not complex, and you can see quick and early wins, right? And if you're an IDN or a Blue or a setup like that, just risk stratifying for care management investment is a great place to start, right? The high utilizer work, that prediction that I was talking to you about, it's fundamentally looking at your population and segmenting them by how much care is needed for what kind of patient, right? You look at modifiable behavior, modifiable outcomes, and you say, I'm going to spend, X amount of time and effort on this patient and X by 2 amount of time and effort on that patient, right? So those kind of things doesn't require the change of the practice of medicine, but are very, I wouldn't say easy, but faster ways to see output. Thanks.
Great. We've got another question, this one for Clifford. Does Microsoft provide special benefits or partner programs for healthcare organizations that are currently on Azure and looking to invest in AI?
So we definitely do. We provide a lot of support. I'd like to sort of maybe modify the question slightly because if there are people who are already in the cloud and on Azure, and there are other partners and customers that are not yet in the cloud. They could be on-prem, they could be wary about going to the cloud. In either case, we provide support and resources to do that. We have a big partner program, so if you're a partner, if you're on Azure already, we have the startup program if you're a startup company. If you're within a hospital, we have a program that we call a customer as a partner. If you're looking to make a solution so we can that is in the AI realm. And if you're not on Azure, we have a program that recruits you to Azure from either on-prem or a competitive area. But we believe we have some very, very powerful tools that, and programs that help you get to that point. Once you mature to the point that you have a solution like KenSci has, and offer those solutions, then we have other programs that sort of incent our sales teams to want to work with you to help you get your solutions out there. So for partners particularly, there's a lot that we offer. I would say first starting point for anyone, if you don't have a partner manager, certainly contact me and I can put you in touch with the right people. You've got my email address, I hope, or if you haven't, it's Cliff Gold. It's the first four letters of my first and last name @Microsoft.com. And if you're a customer, I would say the starting point is to approach your account team. So if you have an account team, they would be able to guide you in the best possible way, whether this was a solution you wanted to monetize in the future or if it was just a solution you wanted to spread across your hospital. They would certainly be incented to help you with that.
Okay, at this time we have to wrap up. Thank you, Sunny and Clifford, for such a wonderful presentation. I would like to invite our audience to complete the evaluation at the conclusion of today's event and share your thoughts with us. As a reminder, today's session will be available on demand for 1 year through the HIMSS Learning Center. Have a great day, everyone.